Allen, faculty, administrators, alumni and trustees, honored guests and parents, and above all, students and especially graduates, congratulations. You've made it to a great milestone in life. You have a lot to be proud of, and I'm very moved to be standing here today in this beautiful place nearby where long ago at the age of 12 I went to summer camp, rode horses, and felt very, very homesick. On this happy day, I would like to ask you to pause briefly to consider one of the biggest problems our world faces today, a problem I want to suggest for which the type of liberal education you have received at UNC Asheville provides one of the most hopeful remedies. The problem is religious intolerance and hatred. And I'm going to begin with a story from my own experience doing research on this topic in India. It's a very hot late June day in Gujarat, a state in western India. The monsoon is soon to begin, and a terrible combination of extreme heat and humidity hangs over us all. With my research assistant, I arrive at the home of K.K. Shastri, the president of the state branch of what's called the VHP, an organization of the Hindu right. I've come to interview him about religious violence in his state, where in March 2002, Hindu mobs, reacting to an event in which it was believed that Muslims had killed 58 Hindus in a train car, although by now, as a result of forensic evidence, the incident is actually believed to be a tragic accident. These mobs killed approximately 2,000 Muslims, most of them utterly unconnected with the original incident, and most of them elaborately singled out for death on grounds of religion only. Women were raped and tortured. Small children were killed and incinerated along with their families. The local VHP, I know, kept lists of Muslim homes and businesses, the better to assist the mobs. So I've come to interview Shastri about those events for a book I'm writing about pluralism and democracy in India. Imagine seeing Mahatma Gandhi clad in his usual white loincloth, his skinny torso bare beneath an almost bald head. Now, imagine this ascetic form joined to a different face, not the kindly, childlike face with its deep, laughing eyes that made strangers so quickly gravitate to Gandhi, but a face something like the one that John Buchan ascribes to his fascist hero in the 39 Steps, the face of a man who could hood his eyes over like a hawk. No humor, no warmth, but a piercing intensity. Now, imagine this composite form extending a skinny arm across the table and touching the arm of my research assistant, Mona Mehta, a young, slender Hindu woman around 5 feet tall who looks very young and vulnerable. He says to Mona, speaking suddenly in Gujarati, "My dear, I must give you a warning. These Muslims, they abduct young Hindu women, they take them away and do terrible things to them." I understand what he's saying only later when Mona whispers a translation in my ear, but I see how the aged form is galvanized with excitement at the thought of little Mona's danger and his own role as guardian of her purity. We spend an hour discussing religious tensions, and Shastri, who has signed a release for me to use the material that I'm tape recording, tries to make a good impression on me. He keeps asserting his desire for peace, while at the same time insisting that Muslims and Christians cause trouble wherever they are. How then, I ask him finally, can peace be brought to Indian society? Peace, he concludes, is impossible while Muslims and Christians are around. They are not prepared to listen. Well, so what's the solution to the problem of Muslims and Christians not listening to Hindus? The only solution is that they should straighten up. How can they be straightened up? We can't do it, he says. A certain force will do it. These Muslims are in the business of spreading poison wherever they go. This is their main occupation all over the world, and they can only be taught a lesson through brute force. Sometimes there are new problems in the world, but in general, the old problems of humanity, deeply rooted in human beings' relationships to one another and to the world in which they live, are the most painful and the most difficult to solve. Some of these old problems will never go away. Mortality, for one, and therefore the grief with which we meet the deaths of those we love, the fear with which we await our own, the frailty of the body, its susceptibility to so many infirmities and diseases, the relative scarcity of things people need to live and live well, food, water, clean air. Some old problems seem to improve locally and temporarily in one or another place, but they still show no signs of disappearing globally. Racism and sexism, for example, sometimes seem to be on the run, but they always reappear somewhere, often accompanied by horrifying violence. But certainly, one of the worst old problems of our world is religious intolerance and hatred. Already in the 3rd century BC, the Indian emperor Ashoka, himself a convert to Buddhism from Hinduism, put forward edicts instituting mutual respect and toleration as official policy. The nations of Europe lagged behind, but by the 17th century, they too had discovered these useful ideas. John Locke's influential letter concerning toleration set out norms of mutual respect and equal citizenship that were influential not only in Europe, but especially in America, where James Madison and Thomas Jefferson built them into the U.S. Constitution. By our time, the idea of a pluralism that shows respect to all religious groups, protecting religious liberty, and promoting conditions of equal citizenship is a major pillar of virtually all the world's liberal democracies. Religious freedom is a major part of all international human rights documents and of constitutions the world over, prominently including the Constitution of India, which has even more elaborate protections for religious freedom than does ours. And yet, intolerance flourishes in virtually every nation. In 2002, India saw those hideous Gujarat riots in which public officials and the police actively collaborated. By now, the Indian Supreme Court has condemned the government for its role, and the national government that passively aided the violence has gone to electoral defeat. And yet, violence remains a looming possibility. Europe has recently seen a frightening rebirth of anti-Semitism and also a birth of anti-Muslim feeling. In Holland, in Germany, in France, ugly, violent incidents are becoming more common. Prejudice against Muslims and a tendency to equate Islam with terrorism are all too prominent in the U.S., a nation of immigrants that ought to know better, since so many of our citizens, early and late, arrived here in flight from religious persecution. Every member of the Hindu right whom I've interviewed for my book on India has assumed that I, as an American, will already be on their side when they say that Muslims cannot be good citizens, when they assert that Muslims are a poison and a danger wherever they are. And of course, we can add that Hindus, too, have been victims of violence and intolerance throughout the ages and even today in some parts of the world. Why is religious intolerance so persistent, and what can modern democracies do about it? The desire to assert supremacy over others is a deeply rooted tendency in human beings. Immanuel Kant called this tendency radical evil, and he thought that people were just born that way, namely, put them together in a group and they'll immediately begin to vie for domination. I myself would prefer to connect this tendency to a deeper human insecurity about frailty and helplessness. We are intelligent creatures who from an extremely early age are aware of extremely great weakness and helplessness toward things of the highest importance, such as food, love, and life itself. It's not surprising if ambitious, intelligent beings in a condition of helplessness should react by striking back at the world, so to speak, attempting to create security in the midst of insecurity. Forming a dominant group that controls the course of life in your region is one very good way to create at least a temporary security, and all the more if that group defines itself as good and its opponents as inferior or even evil. Religion has many roles in human life, many of them extremely valuable. Religions help people cope with loss and the fear of death. They teach moral principles and give us motivation to follow those. They are sources of community in a world of loneliness and alienation. But just because religions are such powerful sources of morality and community, they can all too easily become vehicles for the desire to create security, which I associate with the flight from helplessness and which can be bound up with oppression and hierarchy. When people bond together in a religious group, the very religious nature of the bond makes it all the easier for them to represent outsiders as evil. And the fact that religions usually teach that only one religion is helpful for salvation, perhaps also for overcoming death, suggests that those who don't believe are damned and maybe even evil, in the sense that allowing them to go free in society is to threaten the salvation of younger people. "It's impossible to live at peace with those whom you believe to be damned," said French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Well, it may not be impossible, but it surely has proven very difficult. Rousseau's own solution to this problem was to promulgate what he called a civil religion in his imaginary republic, which included the idea of theological toleration. That is, you've got to believe that everyone's saved, even if they're not from your religion, so long as they accept the other patriotic views that Rousseau then added to his civil religion. People who wouldn't accept that would be banished or even executed. He was well aware that in his idea republic, Roman Catholics and most Protestants would not be able to live, but he thought that that sort of vigilance was worth its price. Rousseau was wrong. His cure is worse than the disease of intolerance. Modern liberal democratic states rightly prize religious liberty and the freedoms of speech and association, even when people are religiously intolerant, so long as they do not actually harm others or perhaps threaten imminent harm. The state should protect their freedom as well as that of the tolerant. But is there then nothing to be done about intolerance? One big part of combating religious intolerance is good laws. Most modern democracies give minority religions strong legal and constitutional protection. The part of the U.S. Constitution that tells us that all citizens have the right to the free exercise of religion has operated over the years to protect Quakers, Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims, and many other minorities from laws that would require them to violate their consciences, for example, by serving in the military when their religion is pacifist, or by working on Saturday when that is their religion's holy day. This part of the Constitution has not always worked well. Judges are afraid of what is new and strange, and Mormonism and Native American religion in particular have been given very unfair treatment in our nation's legal history, as have the claims of Jehovah's Witnesses to be free from imposed ceremonies that they regard as idolatrous, such as the flag salute. Much of the time, however, something works. Minority groups eventually achieve the protections that the Constitution promises them. Equally important is the clause in our Constitution that says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. People today sometimes have the idea that our traditional separation of church and state expresses hostility to religion, or is a way of marginalizing religion, or even expressing the view that religion is not very important. Nothing could be farther from the truth. The founders of the United States believed that religion was extremely important. They also believed that allowing government to take a stand in religious matters would prove very damaging. It would corrupt religion by making it part of a state bureaucracy. It would corrupt government by making religious animosities a daily part of political life. And above all, a point that James Madison stressed most vigorously, it would turn the equality of citizens into a hierarchy. When the government makes statements expressing the thought that ours is a Christian nation, for example, non-Christians are cast as unequal players in the civic drama. They do not enter the polity on equal conditions, to use Madison's words. That's the very shift that the Hindu right in India would like to see today. They would like to define India as a Hindu nation, and minorities feel rightly that this would cast them as unequal citizens. But law is only one part of the solution to the problem that I've described. An even more crucial part is education, which forms the hearts and minds of young citizens and thus provides law with its essential support and life. So I now want to suggest that our traditional concept of liberal education is well placed to advance religious respect and equality. So I'm just going to focus on the college and university part, since that's the part that you have just enjoyed. Here at UNC Asheville, you've prepared yourselves not only for jobs, you've also received a liberal education. So what does that mean? Well, in its most general form, it means an education for freedom, an education that liberates your minds so that you can take charge of your own thinking and become people who stand for something, not passive mouthpieces for tradition and habit. Three capacities, above all, are essential to liberal education in today's world, and they are all, I believe, built into the structure of the education you've received here at UNC Asheville. First is the capacity for critical examination of oneself and one's traditions, for living what, following Socrates, we may call the examined life. Training this capacity requires developing the ability to reason logically, to test what one reads or says for consistency, correctness of fact, and accuracy of judgment. Testing of that sort frequently produces challenges to tradition, as Socrates knew well when he defended his life on the charge that he had corrupted the young. But he defended his activity on the grounds that democracy needs citizens who can think for themselves rather than just deferring to authority, who can reason together about their choices rather than just trading claims and contradictory claims. Like a gadfly on the back of a noble but sluggish horse, he said, he was waking the democracy up, stinging it so it could conduct its business in a more reflective and reasonable way. Our democracy, like ancient Athens, is prone to hasty and sloppy reasoning and to the substitution of rhetoric for real deliberation. We need Socratic abilities to fulfill the promise of democratic citizenship, and your courses in the humanities, in critical thinking, and in other related areas, philosophy above all, fulfill this promise. Citizens who cultivate their humanity need further an ability to see themselves as not simply citizens of one local region or group, but also, and above all, as human beings bound to all other human beings by ties of recognition and concern. We all too easily, as I've said, think of ourselves in these narrow group terms as Protestants or Catholics or Hindus or Muslims first, Americans second, human beings third, if at all. This means that we're unaware of many prospects of communication and fellowship with other people and also of responsibilities we may have to them. Cultivating our humanity in a complex, interlocking world involves a lot of knowledge that American college students rarely got in previous eras. Knowledge of non-Western cultures, of minority cultures within the U.S., of differences of gender and sexuality. I would emphasize especially the great importance of having a basic knowledge of all the major world religions, so that simplistic stereotypes of Islam or of Mormonism or of Native American religions and so on would be subjected to the full complexity of history and the nuances of internal debate. Your diversity courses, your emphasis on foreign languages, and your other international offerings fulfill this part of my proposal. But citizens can't think well on the basis of factual knowledge alone. The third ability of the citizen, closely related to the first two, is what I would call the narrative imagination. This means the ability to think what it is like to be in the shoes of a person different from yourself, to be an intelligent reader of that person's story, and to understand the emotions and wishes and desires that someone so placed might have. The narrative imagination is cultivated primarily through courses in literature and in all of the arts. And I believe that you've attained this ability in your education here through integrative liberal studies, interdisciplinary courses, and the strong emphasis on the role of the arts. And through all these, you are attaining the ability to decipher human meanings through the use of the imagination. I think this is, in some ways, the most essential ability of all, if we're to work toward a world in which we see distant lives as spacious and deep, rather than simply occasions for profit. How might someone like my interlocutor, Mr. Shastri, have been changed by an education of this sort? Well, of course, there will always be bad people in the world, and no education can completely remove the propensity to lord it over others or even to use violence in the service of one's own ends. But so much of what Mr. Shastri said to me shows a complete absence of critical reflection. A paranoid view of society was expressed and never tested. Nor did he have a deep or adequate knowledge of Islam and Christianity. That is why he could demonize them so easily. Finally, what he most especially seemed to me to lack was the ability to imagine at all the pain of another person, an ability that would have made it far more difficult for him to accept with equanimity acts of violence, rape, and torture. Modern societies need all the help they can get if they're going to combat the religious tensions that are such a painful part of our current situation, as they have been of humanity's entire history. We need very badly the help of good laws, but also, and above all, we need the active minds of all you young people, informed and stimulated by a liberal education, if we are ever to live in a world in which we confront the tendencies to humiliation, oppression, and hatred that will always be with us, in the name of a future of equal respect and brotherhood. Congratulations. May you take what you've learned here into the world and create that better future.